Today, I'm talking about Ceylon banknotes from 1885 to 1972. Lanka is an island in the southeast of India and was an important port in the ancient maritime Silk Road between China and Europe. And we were under the Portuguese, Dutch, British, and was independent after 1948. This talk I'm talking about is from the middle of the British period to the time when we became a republic of Sri Lanka in 1972. The first part of this talk I did last year in April and was about notes from 1785, which was during the Dutch period, to 1884. And that period of the British period was mostly with private banks. And in 1885, when this talk begins, the government took over all the private banks and decided to issue its own notes, and there were no more private bank issues from 1885. This is the first note, which was issued on the 1st of January, 1885. It was a hand-signed note. There were no other hand-signed issues for Sri Lanka, but all the issues before that during the private banks were hand-signed, but this one was the first of the government notes, and they stopped hand-signing after that. The only hand-signed specimen I know sold recently on Sphinx. I don't think I bid high enough. I just missed it. And this is actually two parts of two different notes, left and the right. And this is the only one that I have even a picture. If anybody has a picture of the 1885 notes, I would love to have it to put it on my website. In 1887, the similar note was issued. This is also a specimen, and the signatures were printed and no longer hand-signed since then. The 10 rupees issued in 1894, January 1st. All these notes from 1885 had only two serial numbers on the top left and right. And in 1894, September, the same year, they switched to having four serial numbers in red printed on the note. So this crossed across all the denominations. The notes before 1894, September, had only two serial numbers. And after that, it had four serial numbers in red. So that's a distinct change. I'm not sure whether the same change happened elsewhere in the Commonwealth. The interesting part of this note is actually the watermark, and here is a sort of a watermark I try to pick out from enhancing the color of the specimen note. But looking at other notes where I have photographed the watermark, there are four elements of this watermark. On the upper left, there is the elephant and dagaba. That's a symbol which was proposed for the logo of Ceylon. Then there is a leafy symbol out here. I presume you see my arrowhead. And below there is the government of Ceylon written on a banner like this. And on the left, right-hand side, there are waves. So this particular watermark ran all the way up to 1939 with some modifications for the lower denominations. But this was the watermark that was used. And this elephant and dagaba symbol is an interesting symbol. It has, it was used and it's still used in the postal and railway departments, but it was not selected as the coat of arms of Ceylon. It was actually proposed as the coat of arms for Ceylon in 1870. And this was the thing that was actually sent up in 1870 to the colonial office, but the colonial office did not adopt it, but it was actually used as a watermark in our currency notes. Digressing a bit before getting on to notes of our century, there was notes issued in the Boer war camps in 1901 and 1902. These are well documented in this book published by Spinks and by John Emerson, and his catalog numbers are what everybody uses, and I think he has a complete list of the issues that were issued in Ceylon. So these were paper money in rupees and cents, and was valid only within the prisoner enclosures. So technically they are not banknotes of Ceylon, but I think they are interesting set. There are 4 different types, stretching from the Diatalava camp, which was the main camp, which they have notes from 50 cents all the way up to 10 rupees. Then there was another camp in Ragama, which is closer to Colombo, and those notes were issued all the way from 10 cents all the way to 5 rupees. Finally, there was 2 more issues of notes, and they were actually issued by the Ceylon Ice and Cold Storage Company. And this was a private company which most probably provided beverages and food to the prisoners of war. And these notes have been issued, but also for use within the camp and only at the Ragama camp, which is closer to Colombo. And these were issued from 10 cents all the way to 5 rupees, and a different one subsequent to that with a different design from 5 cents all the way up to 5 rupees. So these are the 4 types of prisoners of war notes. They are strictly not Ceylon banknotes, but they are clearly within the collector preview of our banknotes. I don't have any of them. They're quite expensive. Next, after the war, was the issues from 1917. Up to the 1917, only 5 rupees and higher denominations could be issued. Act number 1 of 1917 permitted the denominations of rupees 1 and rupees 2 to be issued. Until then, though, the rupees 1 was basically the Indian rupee coin. And from 1917, Sri Lanka had a rupee independent of the Indian silver rupee. This was the note of 1917, 1st of May. And it was a note with no watermark, but the security was basically given by this note being double-sided with a fairly complicated design at the back of the note, which provided it, it was printed by Thomas de Laru. And it lasted from 1917 to 1939. There are 22 dates, 6 and 16 signature pairs if you want to collect all the signature pairs and the 22 dates. One thing interesting about these notes is that they were also issued in booklets. So there was a 25 notes issued in a booklet, and this is one such booklet that I have, which I have shown in the bottom. And this particular booklet has one banknote within it. And I wonder what will happen if they are slabbed, because then if you are slabbed, you will see no banknotes at all. So I think this is not a good thing to be slabbed. This particular book is from a 1936 note, and I don't know when the changeover from the first design to the second design happened. If anybody has any booklets and can provide me with some clues, then that would be interesting. And if you take, these have a perforation at the end, the ones that were issued in the booklet, and if you look at all the perforations as well and the prefix letter, you get a final total of 58 types you can talk from 1917 to 1939. I have about 28 of them. Not trying to collect them all. Okay. The 2 rupees of 1st of March 1917 was a different design. It also had no watermark, but it was uniface. And the one note I don't have. And it was the note that was discussed in a previous IBNS lecture of notes that were lost at sea. And this particular note was lost in the ship Mongolia, which was 50 nautical miles southwest of Bombay, inward from London with passengers mail on the 1917 June 24th, when he struck a mine laid by SMS Wolf and was sunk. So this particular notes were then demonetized. The notes were demonetized, and that particular design was not used again for a currency note. The next 2 rupee note that was issued in 1917, this is dated November of the same year, after the first one, some of the first was lost. That went back, reverted to the old design and the old watermark, in fact, a slight change because it's a much smaller note. But it did have the elephant and Dagobah, as well as the Leewala and government of Ceylon written at the bottom of the note, and 2 in big letter, sort of 2 rupees written in solid letters in the middle. Then came 1925, when they decided that they were going to put something on the back of all the notes, most probably because there was a lot of notes being counterfeited. I'm not sure, but clearly they introduced a logo. And this logo has also an elephant in the middle between coconut trees. And this logo had been adopted by the logo that was used by the Dutch VOC, which had a similar elephant between coconut trees and mountains behind, and some cinnamon sticks in front. And they adopted a logo similar to that, which is what is seen on the screen. And this particular logo is what was granted in 1906, December 17th, as the arms of Ceylon. So the description of that logo was on Mount Word between grove of 8 coconut nut trees, mountains, perspective, elephant, a fonte, all proper. This looked very absurd. I mean, there was a comment made by the governor. He asked the colonial secretary, how could such a monstrosity as the new coat of arms to came about, and described it as a hideous and absurd. No elephant ever attaining those large size proportions shown when compared with the coconut palms or the extraordinary facial appearance. In informing him that the Herald Office had evolved it, the Herald Office, I presume, is the one in London, which accepts the coats of arms. The colonial secretary has added, it is a sort of thing that one dreams of after a bad dinner. So this is anyway what was adopted, given to us in 1906, rather than the elephant and Dagobah. and it appears on the back of the currency notes from 1925. So the line, there are 4 types of 2 rupee notes from 1925 or 1939, all of which have the this same back engraving. And if you take one of them, it has a watermark which is somewhat different to the previous watermark, which is that instead of having one elephant and Dagaba, this one has 2 elephants at Dagaba, and the Liavala and the waves have gone away. So when I was studying these elephant and Dagaba watermarks, I thought they must be the same, and I suddenly noticed that they actually were not the same and quite different from the previous elephant and Dagaba, which has, instead of a long spear on the top of the Dagaba, it has what they call a parasol. And this parasol is similar to what appears on the Sanchit Stupa in India, and does not appear many in the current Sri Lankan Dagabas, but definitely seen on the Sanchit Stupa. And I looked at this and I wanted to merge them to get a better image, and suddenly realized that the left hand and right hand watermarks were quite different. The one on the left has a bell shape, which is considered one of the shapes of Dagabas in Sri Lanka. And the one on the right has a bubble shape. And those are 2 distinct different shapes for the stupas, and they have actually used 2 different shapes of the stupas, maybe to confuse any counterfeiter. There is also a line that appears on the side of the Dagaba, and that sort of I identified with lightning conductors that are currently visible on most Dagabas. They put a lightning conductor. These are fairly large build structures, so it needs a lightning conductor to protect it. And there are claims that these lightning conductors were on these Dagabas even 2,000 years ago. I'm not sure how far that claim is true, but that is what the archaeologists claim. So that's very interesting that they use that on the watermark. The 2 rupee note also was issued in a booklet, and again 25 notes, 50 rupees was put into a booklet and issued. I unfortunately don't have any of those booklets. The 5 rupee note was issued since then, from 1925 to 1928, where it had a completely different watermark. It had a large 5 here. It had the 2 elephant and Dagaba logos and Ceylon written at the back. These notes were, this note is from my collection, was very large compared to current note sizes. And if you take, that is a 5 rupee note, and this is a current 5,000 rupee note, which is the highest denomination we issue. It was smaller than half the size of the current 5,000 rupee note. So these notes are very rare, and I was lucky to get one. Maybe the oldest note I have in my collection of large size. This also had 2 elephant and Dagaba watermarks, and they are sort of different. The lightning conductor has disappeared from them, but they still made the bell shape, and the this were bell shaped and the bubble shaped of the Dagaba. So these most probably are various tricks that they had to stop counterfeiting of these notes. Around the same time, 1928, this is dated, There was proposals from Dilaru to make our notes a bit more colorful rather than have the drab colonial design which they used in all the countries. And these were some pictorial essays for the 5 rupee note that was proposed in 1928, but was never adopted by the government. We carried on issuing notes all the way up to 1939 without any pictorials. And this is the 5 rupee note with that hideous elephant at the back of it. The 5 rupee notes also were issued in books of 20 for 100 rupees, and they were stapled on the side with 2 staples. This is a picture from an auction. I don't have this 5 rupee book. And it had only rupees 5 written on the front of it. From 1925 to 1928, we had a large 10 rupees, which was pretty much very large. And it had the similar type of watermark with a huge 10 rather than the 5. The rest of the design is very similar to the 5 rupees. There again, in 1928, there were proposals for a pictorial issue of the 10 rupees, which was never adopted. I have been fascinated by these essays that I found online sold by Sphinx because they do represent a fairly interesting background to the currency notes that were adopted and when new proposals were made. And I think I have documented about 150 different types in my website and just showing only a few of them. The 10 rupees again from 29 to 39 became smaller after 1929, but the same design. There must be different variations in the color contrast of the 5 rupee and 10 rupee, like the 2 rupee, but that I have not had enough specimens to identify. That's some study that I need to do. The 50 rupee also was issued all the way from 1894 till 1926. It was always uniface. It did not, there was nothing, it was uniface till 1926 in this case, and had a watermark similar to the 1885 watermark. Nothing sort of significantly different from that watermark except the fact it had 50 rupees written in the middle. It did have a smaller 50 rupee from 1929 to 1939, but that watermark did not change like the 5 rupee, 10 rupee, or the 2 rupee. It basically continued the watermark adopted for the older notes from 1885. The 100 rupee basically was from 1894 to 1926. It was not issued after 1926, so it was only it is only a single uniface note. A biface note, smaller biface note was not issued. The 500 rupee, even though it was authorized in 1885, was not issued till 1926, and it was only year it was issued in 1926, June 1st, and it has again the watermark that was adopted in 1885. It is the only, it's a very extremely rare, I think there's only 2 such notes known to be out in circulation, and those may be destroyed as well. The watermark I got from the specimen that is available in the National Museum. There was a 1,000 rupee note, which is more common than the 500 rupee note, even though they also were all turned in, except for the specimens. and they were issued from 1899 all the way to 1926, which was this last year, and had the similar watermark as before. Again, the 1,000 rupee note was issued in a smaller note with the background, and the watermark again did not change from the 1885 design. Okay, around that time, there were other designs. There are quite a few which I'm not showing here. This one is quite interesting, I feel, because it has a 30th of July, 1937 date with George V. And George V actually died in 1936, January 20th. So this most probably was a design which they really gave a future date and designed most probably around 1935 before he died. And the design is similar to notes that were used for Fiji and the Strait settlements from 34 to 35 and Strait 31 to 35, and were issued this. There was nothing with the king's image issued for currency in Sri Lanka. The first time that currency issued in Sri Lanka had the king's image, monarch's image, was George VI. And this was issued on the 1st of February, 1941. And on the top of it, it said, promise to pay bearer on demand. So the issues of the 1st of February promised them to pay, even though actually I have found older notes, specimens which had a different logo, which I will talk about later. The back of the elephant was back of the note was now pictorial, and it had an elephant with a mahout on top of it. And this particular photograph was taken from a photograph that was taken by Lionel Wendt, who was a famous photographer in Sri Lanka. And he has this particular photograph, which is a slightly different photograph to the note that appears on the currency note. It is told by Fred Madis, who is the oldest numismatist in Sri Lanka, that this one, Lionel Wendt, has sued the government for adopting his photograph without getting his permission to issue the note. But it was never, I don't know what happened to the case. It's some bit of research I need to do. But this clearly, this photograph, which appears in a book with photographs of Lionel Wendt, clearly was of the same elephant and the same mahout. Around that time, the watermark completely changed, and we had a watermark of a lion on its hind legs with a whip. And this particular watermark was used from 1941 all the way up to 1985. So it was a very long-lasting watermark, and it is different from the lion on the flag, Sri Lankan lion on the flag, which has a lion with a sword in his right paw. This one has a whip in his right paw. And it was taken from an old royal stand of the Kandyan period, where the flag was similar to our current lion flag, but again with a sword, with a whip in the hand, rather than the sword, with the tail sort of going quite similar to the current Sri Lankan lion flag, but with a whip. So it's quite interesting that this stems to the royal standard of the Kandyan period in the 1700s. Okay, the 2 rupee note has the similar type of design, and at the back of it has the Sigiriya rock. Now, this particular photograph that I'm showing of the Sigiriya rock was the photograph that was used to design the back of that note. I got it quite luckily from archive, and it has the Sigiriya rock, which is the most famous of our tourist sites. It has frescoes at the back of it. And on the sort of not, it has frescoes in a small cave in the thing. There are supposed to have been 25 frescoes. It is a big tourist site. And this is the picture that was used to do the back of that currency note. It's not in good shape, but it's identical to the one that appears on the currency note. The 5 rupee note has a similar, it has a dagaba at the back, no elephant, but a dagaba. It's a identified dagaba, Tuparama dagaba, which you can identify, and a similar design of the 5 rupee. The 10 rupees of that series had the Temple of the Tooth at the back of it, which is the candy place where they store a relic, which is supposed to be the tooth relic of the Buddha, and is one of our sacred sites in Sri Lanka. So this is the final palace of the tooth relic. The tooth relic came to Sri Lanka around the 3rd century, and there are palaces like this built in all our ancient capitals, from Anuradhapura, Polonnaruwa, and all the other capitals that were used in between. Finally came to Kandy during the Kandyan period and has remained there ever since. There was a proposal to bring it to Colombo, which was not adopted. Okay, then in January 1st, 1942, and you're now looking at wartime, we didn't have enough copper to mint the coins, and the government decided as an emergency measure to issue 25 cents and 50 cents currency notes, which were legal tender for the payment of a sum not exceeding 5 rupees. So these notes were not valid if you wanted to pay more than 5 rupees, but below 5 rupees you could pay with them. There are 2 versions, a 25 cents and a 50 cents. They are quite rare in uncirculated condition. I was very lucky to get uncirculated pair which had been saved by my father-in-law during the war. So I was very lucky to get these 2 specimens. They are mostly not in uncirculated condition. And they had a watermark which was interesting. Their watermark said Ceylon Restriction Government. And they were used in coupons which were used to control the manufacture of tea and rubber. The rubber coupons had a different watermark, but the tea coupons had this watermark that appears on these papers. So these were printed at the government press using, as an emergency print, using the paper that was used to print the tea control coupons. So that's what they had, and they used it for these emergency notes. And the watermark is quite large, not larger than the individual 25 cents and 50 cent notes. And if you want to see the full watermark, you need to have 2 of these notes and put them together, and then you would see the watermark Ceylon Government Restriction. So these were issued on the 1st of January 1942. This is a pair of 25 cents notes, and there's a similar for the 50 cent notes also. You need to get fairly uncirculated notes to see the watermark clearly. Okay, around that time, we also had another emergency issue. Now, this was June 1st of 1942. And this was, I think, the most unique of our notes, because it was a 5 cent note, which had a perforation, some of them which had a perforation right across the middle. And it had a 2 cent and 3 cent stamp, which was current at that time on postal stationery, which was used to say which half would be 2 cents and which half would be 3 cents if the note was torn in 2. So you could basically give this, tear this in 2 and give it as change, on a 2 cents and 3 cents. I think this is absolutely unique. I think there are a few other notes in the world which were designed to be torn in two. And since most of the notes were torn in two, to get uncirculated a specimen is quite rare. Again, my father-in-law had kept some, and I was lucky to get this uncirculated note. Around the same time, from 1942 February to all the way up to December 1949, which was after us getting independence, they issued these banknotes for 10 cents, 25 cents, and 50 cents. So they are similar in design to the Rupee notes, but it has the king's portrait on the front of it. So these are wartime notes. In September, I showed notes up to 10 rupees. In September of 1941, when they first issued the 50 rupee note, and this is a specimen of the 1st of September 1941, the logo changed from the government of Ceylon promises to pay to say this it has no promise to pay bearer, and it says this note is legal tender for 50 rupees. So you have the note, and the note is declared to be worth 50 rupees. You can't convert it into silver or gold. You have the note, and the value is in the note according to government decree. So that is the 50 rupee note. The back of it, similar to that, this Victoria series, had a farmer plowing the fields. And this is the photograph that was used on that currency note of a field being plowed by two farmers using oxen. Something that we have not been able to keep up the tradition of farming with oxen, because now with the power shortage, all the farmers are complaining that they cannot till the ground or reap the harvest because they don't have electricity. So we might have to go back to this old way of farming without electricity very soon. The next note was the 100 rupee note, again issued on the 1st of September 1941. And there was a waterfall. It's the Laksapana Falls. These are the falls that provides hydroelectricity for Colombo. That's been there from the very long. It's one of the oldest hydroelectric plants in Sri Lanka. And that design was taken from this photograph. And the artist has changed it slightly by putting more water in the more distant waterfall, as well as cutting down the rocks so that it didn't cover the waterfall. But other than that, this is the original photograph that was used for the design of that note. I'm trying to collect these photographs because they make a nice story background to the currency notes by having the photographs as well. This is, at that time, from 1941 to 44, there was a 1,000 rupee note as well. And the back of it had a coastal scene. The 1,000 rupee note is extremely rare. I think there's only 2 or so known. It was a gold sovereign was worth 10 rupees at that time. So this 1,000 rupee note was worth 100 gold sovereigns. And since a gold sovereign now in Sri Lanka is worth about 100,000 rupees, this is equivalent to a 10 million rupee currency note. These large notes were needed at that time because all transactions were done with cash rather than electronically. This was demonetized in 1944, and we did not have any more 1,000 rupee notes till 1980s. And devaluation had come down, brought the value of the 1,000 rupees down to much less. There was also a 10,000 rupee note, which should have been worth 1,000 gold sovereigns or 100 million rupees in current day money. This is an extremely rare specimen. I know the central bank has 2 of these specimens displayed in their currency museum. And I'm not sure of any others. I was told by a dealer that there are about 20 of these notes among leading collections. I don't know of who others have it. I would love to know. I was lucky to get one of these specimens, which is definitely the most expensive note I have in my collection. So it was used only for interbank transactions, and it was it was not in general circulation. It had a view of the Candy Lake at the back, and I'm trying to find this particular photograph and not been able to do so. I recently found, and I had posted this on the WhatsApp group, another 10,000 rupee note published in a central bank bulletin. I noticed not only the color was quite different, but also the date on it was 1946. Now it's recorded that the 1947 note was the one that was issued and actually used, but this 1946 specimen printed in India, in the security press in India with CNP logo, was unknown. So there was a poor specimen published in that book, but recently I submitted a right to information and requested a better resolution picture of this 1946 note, and I got it from my request for right to information request. And so this has a redder note, it's a redder note, and I'm wondering now whether my note, which is 1947, was also read like this and has been faded, because these notes of the 1940s, that particular series, are known to have had a red fade. And I can prove this red fade with these 3 currency notes. They are from the same book because they have the same serial numbers A/41 573. And the first 2 notes are 731 and 732, which are red. And the same book, which would have had 25 notes, would basically have gone up to 50. And I have the last note of that book, which has clearly have a red fade on it. So these notes would have definitely been the same color at one time. And the lower note looks like my 1947 10,000 rupee note. So I am not sure whether mine is red faded or not, because the 2 notes that are on display in the central bank currency museum are also very similar to my note. In fact, much more faded because it has been exposed to the sun a lot more. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the British era, 1949. And now I'm going into the next period from 1949 to 1972, when Ceylon was a dominion under the British. So we still consider the Queen as the Queen of Ceylon, but we were independent. So in 1950, August 28, the Central Bank of Ceylon was established under the Monetary Act number 58 on 1949. And notes of the denominations of 1 to 1,000 was issued. 1 to 100 was issued. No 1,000 rupee or 500 rupee notes were issued at that time. Quite interesting when you look at essays, there was even a note which has Reserve Bank of Ceylon instead of Central Bank of Ceylon. So this should have been designed before they adopted the name Central Bank of Ceylon. Actually, Exeter, who was the first governor of the central bank, was seconded from the Federal Reserve Bank in US. And initially, I guess everybody would have thought we would have had a Reserve Bank of Ceylon, like India has a Reserve Bank of India. but this was a name that was not adopted. But there is a full set of note designs from 1 rupee down to 1,000 rupees, which has Reserve Bank of Ceylon. I have put all those notes on my website, and they had a date of 1st January 1950. So when the note was finally issued, it was issued as the Central Bank of Ceylon, and most of the note was in English, which was the state language. And there was only the value of the note, which was in Sinhala and Tamil. And it said this note was issued on behalf of the government of Ceylon, its legal tender in Ceylon for the payment of any amount. It's against legal tender, even though this older Reserve Bank of Ceylon note design said, I promise to pay bearer on demand. So I guess if it was a Reserve Bank, they would have paid, whereas a central bank, they had no obligation to pay. This note was signed by J.R. Jayawardena, who was subsequently the first president of Sri Lanka, and John Exter, which was an American citizen and the first governor of the central bank. We now have a finance minister who is a dual citizen and also an American citizen, creating a lot of controversy. Okay, the first issue had only a 1 rupee note and a 10 rupee note dated 20th January 1951. And the other issues were designed and even printed, but not issued because the king died. And then the Queen Elizabeth became queen in 1952, 70 years ago. And her notes, the similar notes to the 1 rupee and the 10 rupee were issued. This was 2 rupee, and it had the Medirigiriya at the back of the note. And this is the 2 rupee note. It had a 5 rupee note, which had the Pulasti symbol of the statue in Polonnaru at the back. And this note was purple color. And next in 1952, which was the first issue of 1952, but the same issue in 1954 turned to red color. And it remained red till the 5 rupee note was discontinued in 1982. The reason it be changed from purple to red is described by Tuan Saleh in his book, which says that the governor had sent a 5 rupee note to the shop with his servant and had been sent back 2 rupees of change, because in the dark, the shopkeeper had thought that the 5 rupee note was a 2 rupee note based on the color. And he decided to change the color of the note from purple to red so that it could be clearly identified even in the dark as in the correct denomination. And purple notes have come into vogue recently and having the same problems because you cannot identify by the color in the dark. So that was 1954, which was the last time we had the queen or a king on our currency notes. In 1956, there was a change of government. And in 1956, April 12th, the new government, nationalist government, took power of the country. And within a week, he decided that not only was the queen going to go out of the currency notes, they were going to remove the English and put Sinhala into the currency notes. This was actually legislated only 3 months later. I find this design, which was sold by Spinks, with a design date of 1956, April 19th, just 1 week after the takeover of the government, quite interesting. Because at that time, they didn't even have a Sinhala name for the central bank, and they called it Lanka Pradana Bankur rather than Sri Lanka Mahabankur. So this was a quick job trying to remove the English and put Sinhala. And another interesting fact of this design was they had proposed to use Tamil at the back of the note instead of English, so that there would have been a reasonable use of Tamil as well on the currency note rather than only English, Sinhala and a little bit of Tamil and English. The proposal was to change the Queen and replace him either with the lion with the sword, which was in the then adopted flag of Ceylon, or the armorial ensign, which had been adopted in 1954, which had the lion with the sword again in a logo. Finally, what was adopted was the one with the logo, and the Sinhala-only Act was passed in 1956, July 7th. And we have these notes from 1956, July 30th, which has no Tamil, except for the denomination in Tamil. So they basically took all the English that was on the currency note, changed it to Sinhala, and changed the Tamil into, sorry about that, and changed the rupees into in English, the Tamil Sinhala rupees into Tamil. So there was a split between the English and the thing. The Tamil remained only the denomination as it had been previously. So came 1961, November 2nd, and then we got the Prime Minister who had done the Sinhala-only Act was assassinated in 1959, September 26th, and his image was put into the currency notes in 1961 for the first time, after his wife became the first Prime Minister, female Prime Minister of Sri Lanka. The wife contested, and after his demise, and won the election and was made the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, Ceylon at that time. So the notes didn't change other than the image of the logo being going there. The lower denominations, particularly the 1 rupee note, never got the portrait, and it remained the logo of Ceylon and was discontinued in 1963. So 1963 happens to be the time when we no longer stopped using the 1 rupee note. A coin was issued in 1963. Coins of all the denominations down to 1 cent was issued in 1963, removing the monarch from coinage. So so after that, these notes also had a metal security thread, and they appear in all the notes from 1960. So this was the last 1 rupee note issued on June of 1963. So it took another 5 years from 1956, when the English name and the Tamil name of the Central Bank of Ceylon was removed. It took another so many years for the name of the Central Bank of Ceylon to reappear on the currency notes in Tamil and English. And that only happened in 1969. And these are 2 notes. This is the 100 rupee note. But the same design of the 100 rupee note was actually issued all the way from 1952, except in the back of it. The front, actually, in this case, has become the statue in Polonnaruwa. So there was a change of what appeared from the armorial ensign to SWRD Bandaranaike's image to this armor, this statue of King Parakram Bahu, but they actually say this was actually not King Parakram Bahu, but a sage named Pulasti, who lived around the same time. There are people who look at this say, oh no, he's from Indonesia and has a face cap on top. So maybe that's a different story. Okay, and then in 1969, before that, if you take the late 50s to the 1969, Dilaru as well as Bradbury Wilkinson's was providing a huge array of notes, designs for them to change the design that they had adopted in 1951. But that note design just stuck all the way up to 1976. And we got all these beautiful designs of the 1960s. I have put a whole lot of them on my website, was never adopted. Except there was a new design only for the 50 and the 100 rupee note, because in 1970, after a new government came in, they decided to demonetize the 50 rupee and the 100 rupee note for the same reason that India recently demonetized the 500 and the 1000 rupee note, creating a similar chaos in Sri Lanka. I was in school at that time, and they issued this 50 rupee note with, again, returning the SWRD's image to the note, and in fact doing worse than previously by showing him raising his hand, and the hand being the political symbol of that party that had won. This note was deemed illegal because notes should be not have political symbols on them. It was bad enough having the prime minister's image. This was a new design, and the printing order was given to Dilaru rather than Bradbury Wilkinson. Bradbury Wilkinson had been printing all our notes from 1951 all the way up to 1969. But to keep the demonetization a secret, they gave this order to Dilaru. So Dilaru printed these notes, a 50 rupee note and a 100 rupee note, to replace the demonetized 50 and 100. So they all notes issued before 1969. And these Dilaru notes, interestingly, introduced for the first time replacement banknotes. Now, the concept of replacement banknotes were never used before. Currency notes had to be printed with the correct serial number and issued. But for Dilaru seemed to not like to bother to print notes of the same serial number, and they, for the first time, introduced replacement notes. Now, these are issued around 1970, when none of the collectors knew very much about replacement notes. And this is a 100 rupee replacement note with V/1. I don't have it. This is from a dealer who gave me a picture. And basically, the serial numbers are D, prefix had a D and a E, and the replacement prefix are W/1 and V/1 instead. How many there were? Now, this particular 100 rupee note has a number 3000, which is reasonable. But I have a replacement note W/1 in my collection, which has a replacement number of 95,922, which is much higher than I would expect to have replacements based on the replacement probability of recent banknotes. So I'm not sure whether they printed 100,000, which was the total number of serial numbers, to try to replace them with the correct prefix, even if it was not the same number in most cases, unless the same serial number got damaged twice. I don't know. So I am quite curious to know about the 1970 replacement notes. The central banks denies any knowledge about what happened then. Interesting observation by a dealer, Jackson, who may be on this call. I asked him to join, but I'm not sure whether he's on the call. And he says that he has not found any notes with the second date. So maybe they use the first date's replacement notes to cover the second date as well without printing a new set of replacements for the second date. But that's very interesting. There were no replacement notes. The order went back from Bradbury Wilkinson from Thomas DeLauro back to Bradbury Wilkinson's, and Bradbury Wilkinson's did not use replacement notes. So there is no replacement notes from 1971 to 1986 when Bradbury Wilkinson plant in Biagama was taken over by DeLauro because DeLauro bought up Bradbury Wilkinson. And from 1987 to 1990, we get them even printing with the Bradbury Wilkinson name, but replacement notes. But that is for my next talk. Again, there was one note issued before 1972 Republican Constitution, which had ultraviolet printing. This was the first note to get ultraviolet. It was a 100 rupee note issued subsequent to the note that was used to demonetize. They removed the hand from Bandaranaike because that was considered illegal. And this was the last 100 rupee note, including ultraviolet printing, which was issued before that date. That was the back of the note. It has the micro printing also in ultraviolet, and it's an interesting ultraviolet. There are a lot more ultraviolet notes I will be talking about in my next lecture. This was the last note with the date before May 22nd, 1972, when we became a republic within the Commonwealth. And this was dated 12th of May, and it had the same design as previously. There is a slight difference in the Sinhala statement. This says Lanka Andua, and after 1972, as I will show, the logo became Sri Lanka Andua. Right. So all these notes are actually put into this catalog I published about 3 years ago in 2019 and was selected, given honorable mention by IBNS, for which I am very thankful. And it is all on my website, notes.lakdiva.org. I'm not sure how far I have gone. Maybe I have gone far too long, but anyway, that's my talk. And I will open up for questions. I will stop sharing at the moment.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Kavan. No, it was perfectly 1 hour if we remove the first part. So thanks for sharing.
Okay.
I open with the first question. Okay. The photos that you find of the back, how do you know they actually are the original photo? They come from an archive? You have some history behind?
Yes, one is that you can compare the note exactly. And if you take a photograph of Sigiriya, you can know that the tree and everything looks exactly the same as what was on the note. So that is proof. They were actually given to me also by somebody who worked in the central bank. And he had got it from the commissioners of currency. He was a collector himself. And before he passed away, he gave me these notes. It's sort of my responsibility to make sure they get into the correct hands. Maybe I should go and give them back, give it to the Central Bank Museum, but they're currently with me. And so that is of the 20, I have the 2 rupee, 50 rupee, and the 100 rupee notes. So I presume there may have been similar designs. I'm looking at the postcards to see if I could find out the other notes well, but I have not so far managed. I'm on a hunt even for the modern notes to find the actual photographs that may have been used in the modern notes. So it is, I know these particular ones that I've got in pretty bad condition still are very unique. They are from the original archives of the central bank, of the commissioners of currency before they were sort of taken over by the central bank. There was no formal transfer of the archives of the commissioners of currency to the central bank. So few things got misplaced between the two transfers.
Anyone who wants to ask questions, please unmute yourself.
I would love to hear from people who may be having notes from this era, particularly those older notes for which I have no images.
I do have a question, Kavan. Yeah. The question is concerning the notes with perforated edge and non-perforated edge. Yeah, like these 1 rupee, 1917 to 1937. Those which are perforated, they were printed in booklets by 25. You mentioned.
Yes.
But what about those?
5 rupee was 20 rupee. 5 rupee was 20.
Yes. What about those which were not perforated? Were they printed in sheets or were they also in booklets and they were cut out of the booklet?
I think they must have been printed in sheets with a little bit of edge, which was used for the perforated counterfoil, right? I can't think of them printing a sheet which had a different design. They most probably printed them and then cut it up and kept the edge for the ones they perforated and removed the edge, because I have posted on my website all of the notes, all of the serial numbers that appear in those notes, which was actually published in a book published by Tuan Saleh. He gives all the serial numbers from the central bank records. He actually worked for the central bank, and his book that he published for notes between 1938 and 1985, which has actually serial numbers all the way from 1909, except for a few errors that I have identified, is fairly complete and accurate. There are a few places where people have shown me notes which do not match exactly what is in that book, and I have corrected those with a note on my website. So I think you can reasonably take the series numbers in my book, in the website, to be correct. And if you find anything that does not match, I would love to know it, because I can correct that error from that book. So far, I have not done an exhaustive hunt of those notes. It matches my notes that I have in my collection, but I'm not sure whether there is a note outside which does not match. A few of them have been reported to me, and I have corrected it accordingly. But there was nothing above 5 rupees. The 5 rupees was issued in a book, and I'm lucky to have a book of 1946 5 rupee notes, which was issued, which I didn't show a picture of. I don't know why. But that's the only book that I have. It's a complete book of 5 rupee notes from 1946. It's, I think, the only one existing in the world. I was very lucky to get it because it was lost in my grandfather's almirah and was found after he passed away in 1978 at the back of his almirah. And luckily, the rest of the family did not value it as much as I did, and I have it in my possession now. Okay.
Great stuff.
Any other questions?
One more question, Kavan. Okay. It concerns the large size notes 1885 till 1917. I have noticed that the color of the main print is usually black and underprint is green. But I have in my collection some of the dates which have the brown main print and yellowish underprint. Is it because of these colors have been faded away, as you mentioned with the 1 rupee?
I have not actually studied the higher denominations. 2 rupees definitely has color changes between 1925 and 39, and I suspect the 5 rupee and the 10 rupee also has slight color changes. But you need to get a fairly large collection of uncirculated notes to actually make sure that thing. But I always hold this caveat that because of the color fading, you have to have sufficiently large number before you are conclusive about when it changed and what. I don't know whether there is any documentation. Central bank sort of doesn't have any, and Saleh did not publish any information in his book. So most of that information that I have from that period is all Saleh's research at the central bank archives. I have not personally gone and done research on those notes, but the number of notes I have is so minimum. I am actually collecting as many pictures that I can find online of those notes, so that one day I might have enough to do something about the color variations. But it's very difficult to work with images without actually having notes to compare.
Thank you. Understand. Thank you.
There is any, maybe this to Ludek and Joe, there is any way or test to check if pigments into an ink disappear, if originally they were there, but then they disappear because of color changing? There is anything which can test something like that?
I presume you can test the color, but then you don't, unless you have, like my case, where I have 2 currency notes from the same booklet, and therefore by definition they should be of the same color, and they look quite different now. I don't know whether there was variation, but actually pigments can be tested with a particular type of fluorescence. So you can actually get the spectrum of the pigments and see whether there is color change. That should be an interesting study to do some color change study to see whether the pigments changed. But each print run would have most probably had its own color. So, and they may not have been, they may have intended to produce the same color and not achieved it. So one questions whether these are deliberate changes in color. I think since the serial numbers change color in the 2 rupee notes, clearly there is distinct changes there, but you don't see that sort of major change in the other denominations. So those have to be less than the 2 rupee note, but could be pigment changes in the different print runs. So that's a fairly big job. I have not actually have the resources or the number of notes to do that sort of study.
The sample that you show with color changing, they were inside the same book, or you reunite them later?
No, they were from the same book, because as I showed you, the serial numbers.
No, I understand they were from the same book, but you had them into that book and they changed while they were contained in the book, or around?
Most probably, what happens is that book may have been broken up. The fact that I got 2 uncirculated things may have come. They came to me differently from 2 different collections, okay. Right? Oh. They were not from the same book. But I have a feeling that last note may have been kept. There are a lot of Sri Lankan shops have a habit of taking their notes and keeping it under the glass in front of their counter. And that's a habit. I don't know whether it's done abroad, but clearly in Sri Lanka, if you go to a lot of shops, you find them keeping old notes. When they go out of circulation, they stick their last note under the glass. And then it gets a very bad beating by sunlight hitting the glass for a long period of time, and they fade. I mean, some of us have gone sort of trying to buy those notes from this shopkeeper who knows nothing of their value and trying to say, how about selling me that note? Some of them it has worked, and I have got one or two notes like that. But generally, they are smart now. They were not smart 20 years ago.
They don't even have to be in sunshine. There's lots of artificial light which will also affect colors like that. Now, if you want to find out whether the ink was originally there, you can probably do that with XRF detection. Another thing you can use is ultraviolet. I've had some MPCs sent to me. They're supposed to be color omitted, but you put them under UV and you can clearly see that they were printed. They're just faded away.
Yeah, I see that in UV printed notes. There was somebody who came to me and said this note had a serial number missing, and I sort of put it under UV and I could see the serial number. So I realized that it was not serial number missing, but serial number erased. So that sort of note is known. But I know there is not XRF actually. It is a different spectroscopic tool, which I think I have access to in Colombo. I don't have. I will try actually doing that on those some of the notes to see whether we can identify the pigment. Such an instrument was actually brought to study fresco paintings in Sri Lanka, to study the pigments in them. And maybe I can get access to that to see whether I could detect pigment changes in the Sri Lankan banknotes. Okay, any other questions? I would like, if there is a few minutes, I don't mind showing a tiny bit of my website to you for about 5 minutes, if that is okay. Is there a few minutes?
5 minutes is okay. We don't have anyone. I just want to go to sleep. I don't know the rest of the chat.
Okay, 5 minutes, 5 minutes.
Hold on. I give you back posting. Okay, here you are.
Okay, so now I'm going to share. I have to go back. Yeah, I think I wanted to show my website a bit, because I'm not sure how many have actually gone in there, and I think it will be an advantage to show a bit of that on the PowerPoint so that people might get encouraged to go in there. I'm definitely not going to do much detailed work there, which anybody can go and see what is on that website. So let me see. Okay. Sure. Okay, now I'm sharing. Okay, my website. I presume you are seeing it now. I want to.
Yeah. Okay, there we have it.
Okay. Now I will. I wonder where? Okay, so this is the sort of the front end. Are you seeing it going down? The changing when I move this down.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So the main site from the front page basically has a listing all the way from the Dutch notes to the British notes, to all the banknotes. I've put each series and denomination in different lines. And you come up to here would be the Boer War stuff. Central back to the 1885 notes, for example, or and if you go into that note, I will show the screen, and I have actually hidden automatically when you put your cursor on top of it, it expands to the full size of the screen. So that is, I think, useful feature so that you don't have to click, you don't have to take your cursor over anything. The other one that I want to show you is that, and if you go to the more modern notes, like the, let's say the 1 rupee Boer notes. All right, I have all this particular one has only 2 issues, the serial numbers, and in this case, I tell what the ones that have a booklet on it. So the serial numbers would be between the A6 and the A11. And I'll show another image. If you take the Queen Elizabeth notes, I have all the notes that appear for that series. I have not put all the dates, but I have taken every type is displayed. And every subtle variation is also shown here, right to the bottom. Watermarks, differences between the notes, and etc. So I'm trying to put as much information as I can get. And further down, I in fact have this page on printer essays. And this is a fairly comprehensive collection of all the notes that I found online, both described as well as put in a listing, all the way from 1928 to 1978, which was the last date that I've managed to find essays online. And then I have in this website a lot more other stuff, including fantasy notes and whatever, anything associated with Sri Lanka has been put. This is one particularly interesting note, which is a 25-cent note, Wartime, which has a 25-cent design, which is different from the design that was adopted. Here again, there may have been a color variation, but this particular design is a pattern dated 14 July 1942, which is different from the standard design. I have this for the 25-cent. I have not seen any others for that, but there is the 5-cent note. I have managed to find quite a few different designs. In fact, the design of it being just hand-drawn as to what it should be, to a design like this, which didn't have 2 stamps on it and was probably designed to paste a stamp on it, postage stamp on it, and become a note. Those are interesting things. And this was a pattern which had a green 2 cents and 3 cents. So there's a lot of information which I didn't manage to cover in the lecture, which is there on this website, and I strongly suggest you to go and see it. Okay, thank you.
You cover counterfeits?
I don't cover I do cover. I can't. I have. There are counterfeits after 1979, for example. There is a counterfeit of the 100 rupee 1979 bird, but they are legal tender. So they are technically not permitted to be held by me because it's illegal to be held. I have seen that counterfeit, but I have not covered any of the counterfeit. I will talk about that in the next lecture, where a lot of the security details are now being published on them. But those counterfeits, I think, actually there is some very old counterfeits that I've seen online. Maybe I should add those because when they are not legal tender, I presume I can show them on my website. But things that are legal tender, which is any note issued after 1951, except for the 50 rupee and 100 rupee notes before 1969, are currently still legal tender and are protected. And when that book was published with catalog, the central bank insisted that we wrote specimen, stamp specimen over every legal tender note. So we did that. My other specimens are only the 1941 specimens, which is a set of specimens from 1 rupee to 10,000 rupees, which I managed to get. I have seen the specimens from 1 rupee to, I think, 100 rupees on auction. I have never seen the 1,000 or the 10,000 on auction. Okay, are there people? I'm really interested in getting in touch with the really high-end collectors who may be having a lot of stuff I don't have. I know of 2 or 3 in Sri Lanka who I'm in touch with, but there may be a lot of collectors in the US. I guess the one that had an auction in 2011, Spink auction on April 2011, and those notes never got sold in auction, is the only major collector I know about abroad. There must be a lot more, and I would love to be in contact with them so that at least I could document this stuff on the web. I personally don't buy the more expensive notes, and I put a ceiling of $300 US for any note that I buy and put into my collection and just collect images for the more expensive notes.
So the 1,000 rupee, you pay $300?
No. That came as a set, and it came actually because the person who had it wanted it to be available to somebody who was not going to sell it. He knew that if it was given to me, I will never sell it and I will find a good home for it. And therefore, I got it for a very reasonable price. Maybe 1/100th of the current market value.
Good for you.
But that brought a responsibility for me to make sure that these notes get to a museum or someplace where it will be protected. Unfortunately, I cannot trust the National Museum in Sri Lanka, Colombo, or the Central Bank Museum. Not that maybe they would be protected that, but they do not. I definitely have evidence that they not know how to handle numismatic material, how to look after them properly so that they don't get damaged. So they have taken coins and valuable coins and pasted them with double-sided tape on a display. They have taken this 10,000 rupee note in the Central Bank Museum and pasted it on naked on the wall, on the poster with double-sided tape or whatever, I don't know. And I can't risk giving these notes to people who don't know how to handle them. And therefore, it will have to be given to some organization which will ensure that there is somebody competent at handling them and not some bureaucrats.
Makes sense.
Very good presentation, Kavan. This is Dharmesh.
Thank you.
Yeah, we are not very far from each other. Just we are neighbors. So yeah, I would love to come to Sri Lanka and hopefully catch up with you. and also visit like lots of monuments that have been featured on the banknotes of Sri Lanka, Ceylon.
Yeah, I have collected pictures of them, but I was lucky to get these few which I showed, which were exactly the same as used. I have not found any others. But it's an interesting, I did find the more modern notes, which I'll talk in the next lecture. There were three objects from the museum, and I have found two of them, the photographs. So it's a bit of a hunting to find those, but it's an interesting challenge.
Thanks for this. Thanks for the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kavan. Very informative presentation, and I'm looking forward for the next one. Really appreciate. Thank you.
We'll do it next year, maybe.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. I have actually a version which was more highlights, which I talked about coins and currency over the full period, which I have a YouTube video, which I have linked. I gave it to the US Newman numismatic lecture series, and it is linked on my website, but that is on a very on both coins and currency over the full period, so I could only use the highlights. Okay, thank you very much.
Right, then. Thank you again, Kavan, for sharing your knowledge. Anybody who wants to share the knowledge, I'm just an email away, and thanks to all the supporters. I'll close the session tonight.
Thank you.
Good night for me. Bye now.
Good
Thank
day.
you. Bye.
Bye.